All right. Hello, everyone. How are you? Thank you for being here. My name is Dominic D'Andrea. I am the Director of Community Engagement at Queens Theater, and you are here for the QT Makes Kitchen Sink Cookie Series, which we are super thrilled to have you with us today. Um, I'm looking up because I have a batch of cookies in the oven and it's about to ding at any second, so I will try to make this quick. Um, Today we're going to be making cookies. Over the last month, we've been doing baking tutorials on Wednesdays to honor our audience, our community members in Queens, and everybody on the internet who's sheltering in place to try to just learn how to do some. 1 second. I have to make sure my cookies don't burn. But we're trying to make these Wednesday sessions happen to help people understand what it means to stretch our ingredients, to look at the pantry that we have available and accessible to us, and try to figure out what's the best way to make food with what we have. So all of these sessions have been really forgivable in terms of the recipes. They can all take adjustments. They can all live in the margins of not being totally perfect, and that's great. Fridays at 7:30 p.m. we have Queen's Storytelling show hosted by our friend David Lawson. It's free. It's also on the Zoom and live streaming the Facebook platform. And then Saturday we'll have a Spanish language concert called The Sound of the Borders, which we will be live streaming again on Zoom and Facebook. It is a totally Spanish language concert designed to engage our Queens participants and our Spanish language patrons and friends all around the country. I have been really honored and thrilled to have my college classmate and old pal Marissa Troeschel, who went all the way to the end of the Great American Baking Show this year and was like on the final podium on the final day, and I watched her whole season in real time. Like, I hoped she was going to win. And she is an amazing baker. So for those of you who heard Jay's announcement earlier, if you are on the Zoom, you have the ability to ask questions by using the chat and raising your hand. For those of you who are watching on the Facebook, welcome. People are watching in two ways, but if you're on the Zoom with us, you have the ability to interact and engage. And those of you on Facebook, write it in the comments and we'll try to pluck out some of those questions from Marissa too. But because we want to get going, let me welcome Marissa Troeschel to the screen. I think she's there. Oh, yeah.
I'm here.
All right. How's it going?
Good, good. I'm so happy to be here, and Queens has my heart. I lived in Astoria for 5 years, and I'm just really excited.
All right, y'all. Well, get going. And in the back end of this, we'll pick some questions. And also, if you're baking along on any social media, use the hashtag QTMakes or email Jay or myself or Marissa or Facebook or whatever. Send us your pictures and we'll make sure we'll post it on the back end. But without any further ado, Marissa, take it away.
Okay, we're gonna make some, I call these kitchen sink cookies. They're really adaptable. You can add whatever mixins you have around the house. This is based on a recipe from Baked from Scratch. And you know, you can mix up the spices, mix up the ingredients, and they're very forgiving and they're super tasty. So we're gonna start by creaming our butter and our sugars. I do not currently have a stand mixer with me, so I'm gonna do this by hand, but if you have a stand mixer, it'll probably make it a little bit easier. So we have 2 sticks of butter. If your butter's not soft, a good trick is unwrap your butter, put it on a plate, and microwave it in 10-second increments on power level 2. And your butter will soften right up without melting. So that's a trick I found on the internet a while back, and I actually did it this morning because my butter was not soft, especially since I'm beating it by hand. So I have my 2 sticks of butter, and then I need a half a cup or 100 grams of just regular granulated sugar. I use a kitchen scale for most of my baking. Like scooping out cups can be a little inaccurate, and the scale is always 100%. This one was like $12. It's super handy, especially if you are starting to get into baking. I know everyone is baking sourdough bread right now, and having a kitchen scale is going to make that process so much easier and accurate, especially if you're doing stuff like cakes that, you know, just one, you know, little bit too much flour, a little bit too much this can just throw the whole thing off. So I have 100 grams of sugar, and you can just dump it right in here. And also too, less dishes. If you have a scale, you can just dump everything in your bowl. You don't have all, you know, a whole bunch of different cups and stuff to weigh. So I have my white sugar, and then I am doing a cup of, so 200 grams-ish, 220 grams of brown sugar. This is dark brown sugar. Light brown sugar is fine too. Cookies I think are one of the more forgiving baking items that, you know, if you add a little bit too much of this or don't add enough of that, then maybe your cookie's just a little crispy, and that's fine. So we want to mix this until it's really well incorporated. If you're using a mixer, if you're using a stand mixer, you want to use the paddle attachment. You could also use hand beaters. If you have those, it would make this process a lot faster, but it's also completely doable by doing it by hand. I made a batch last night by hand, and they turned out great. So you just got to get some elbow grease in there. If you are using a stand mixer, mix it on medium until, you know, your sugar's nice and fluffy. It's not necessarily going to get as fluffy when I'm doing it by hand. I'm just really focused on making sure all of the sugar and the butter is incorporated. So just gonna keep doing this for a couple minutes. If your butter is nice and soft, if it's not as soft, like I said, you can stick it in the microwave, power level 2, 10 seconds at a time until it's nice and soft. Yeah, so this is coming together pretty easily. Another kind of handy baking trick is making sure your ingredients are all at the same temperature. Sometimes you want them all to be room temperature. So if you're baking something like a cake, cookies, where you want your items to be room temperature, you want, you know, your butter, if you're using milk, eggs, to all be room temperature. It will help your whatever you're making bake up evenly. But, you know, other things like pie crust or biscuits, you want everything to be cold. So kind of the name of the game is keeping everything the same temperature. Sometimes you will see, I have seen recipes though that will call for like room temperature eggs, but cold milk. So there are definitely exceptions, but as a general rule, it's helpful to have everything the same temperature. Okay, so I'll give it one good beat and try to get it a little air incorporated. Okay, so here's my butter and sugar. Everything is nicely incorporated. And then I'm going to add my eggs one at a time. I also find it helpful when I'm cracking eggs, because I get shells all the time, to do it in a separate container, like a little glass or a little bowl. That way, if there's shells, you can pick out the shells. Also, if you get a bad egg, which I never have, but you could, you're not going to ruin your whole batch of stuff because you crack the egg separately. So I'm going to do one egg at a time. If you're using a stand mixer, do it the same process. You want to do one egg at a time. Make sure it's nicely incorporated into your batter. Give it a good mix before adding my second one in. It's a little I'm getting a little sloppy, but you just have to keep working it. Patience. Baking takes a lot of patience. I think that's why some people are hesitant to bake or hesitant to get into baking, because it does require a lot of patience. You really do have to follow the recipe. Once you kind of have the basics down, then you can start experimenting with flavors, and kind of, if you understand the science of it, you can start to play with things like throwing in an extra egg yolk, usually adds some extra moisture, playing with substituting some dry ingredients, some flour out for other types of flour. Okay, so I got my first egg mixed in really nice. I'm gonna mix in my second egg, no shells. And
So Marissa,
what?
so while we're doing that, we have a comment
Yeah.
from the Q&A section here, which I think is a good question to have as well. Daniel Bonthius asks, well, my brown sugar is always hard as a rock because I don't use it quickly enough. That's a problem I often have. Do you have any tips about how to repurpose older brown sugar that's dried out?
I think, the internet might be more helpful. I do think if you microwave brown sugar, again, I think it's kind of a low temp. You know what? I'm gonna look it up while we're talking here because I'm curious. I do know, if you kind of, an old trick that my grandma used to do is she used to store a piece of bread in the jar with the brown sugar, which helps keep, basically the brown sugar like sucks the moisture out of the bread, and will keep your brown sugar, get brown sugar soft. Let's see. Okay, this says to microwave so put a moist paper towel over your brown sugar and microwave for about 20 seconds. And that should help soften up your brown sugar. But also, the thing about the bread works really well, and just keeps it soft in general. But yeah, I have that problem too. Also, if you just kind of invest in some storage jars, like have like a really tight seal, that will also help keep your brown sugar nice and soft. So in here I have my second egg, and I also added a tablespoon of vanilla extract. This is pure vanilla extract, but I know this has been hard to come by, and actually I have a bottle of vanilla flavoring in the pantry too, and sometimes that's okay. I think in something that's not super vanilla forward, like a cookie where there's a lot of other things going on, use what you got and save if you have kind of a limited quantity, save the good vanilla for like a vanilla cake or a vanilla frosting where you really want that really nice vanilla flavor. And if the vanilla flavoring was kind of all you could find, then use that for stuff where you just kind of want a hint of it. So I mixed in my vanilla, my second egg. So it looks like a little, you see it looks like a little curdled. That's fine. I think my second egg might have been a little cold because I dropped one of my eggs right before we started. So that's kind of what can happen if the butter is nice and room temperature and then you add a cold egg, it can kind of solidify that butter a little bit, but it'll all come together. It's all good.
Got a couple of people asking here if they should be preheating their oven.
Not yet, because we're actually going to let this dough sit in the fridge after we put it together for about 10-15 minutes, and that's just enough time to preheat your oven. So you have time to do that. If you do want to just get it going, if your oven takes a really long time to preheat, we're going to bake these at 375, so you can get that going. So now we're going to mix up our dry ingredients in a separate bowl. Let's set this aside for a second. We have 2 cups of all-purpose flour, which I know has been hard to come by. Still, which is just crazy. So all-purpose flour, that is 2 cups is about 240 grams of flour. Hopefully this bowl's big enough. Okay, and then we're gonna add in our oats. Now, when you're baking with oats, you wanna use, you don't wanna use, I mean, if you have them, it's fine, and your cookie might just bake up a little chewier. If you have the quick cook oats, usually with baking, you wanna use the old-fashioned oats, but if all you have is quick cook oats, they'll still work. It's totally fine. And Dominic was talking about some cookies that he made last night, and he really did add the kitchen sink. I think he put potato chips, Cheez-Its, I'm not sure what else in there. If you're adding a lot of extra dry ingredients, which I think is a great idea, I love the idea of potato chips, you might want to I would either add an extra egg yolk to your wet ingredients, or substitute out kind of equal parts of the oats for the extra dry ingredients you're adding. If you add all the oats recommended plus your extra dry ingredients, your cookie might be a little dry because those extra dry ingredients are going to suck up all that moisture. So I love the idea of adding in that kind of stuff, but you just want to make sure, 240 grams. You just want to make sure that you're adding, you're balancing it out. But throwing in an extra egg yolk is a great way to add extra moisture to your cookie. So I got my oats. $240 grams or 3 cups. Okay. Then we have a teaspoon of baking soda. And a teaspoon of cornstarch, which if you don't have cornstarch, it's completely fine. Adding a little cornstarch can just help make your cookies a little bit softer, but there's still plenty of moisture in these cookies, so if you don't have the cornstarch, it's really not a big deal. And then we're gonna add a teaspoon of cinnamon. And a half a teaspoon of salt. I'm using kosher salt. Use whatever you got, use what you got. And then I'm gonna mix this up. Just mix it, give it a nice toss so everything is evenly incorporated. If you are going to add some dry ingredients like some crushed up chips, I would add them into this mix rather than at the end. We will add our other mix-ins like your nuts, your chocolate, candies, whatever you got at the very end. So now I'm going to add in the dry ingredients to our wet. I'm gonna do a couple additions, probably 3 additions, just so I'm making sure it's nice and evenly incorporated. And just kind of, I like to do a little fold. So fold is when you can see, take from the middle and you kind of scoop under and fold it into the middle. So this isn't a delicate dough. You don't, once it's in there, you can kind of give it a little more elbow grease. If you're using your stand mixer, definitely do it in additions using your stand mixer with the paddle attachment. But folding also helps you not get stuff everywhere. I am not the neatest baker. It was really nice on the baking show that you don't really have to worry about dishes because we had like an amazing staff who you just set stuff aside. they take your dirty dishes, you ask for a clean pot, a clean whisk, and they bring it out to you, which made things, I mean, simpler, you know. At least you didn't have to, there was so much going on in the tent, at least you didn't have to worry about that bit. But at home, I definitely make a bit of a mess sometimes, but that's okay. All right, so the last of my dry ingredients, get that all incorporated so you don't see any dry bits, but you don't want to, definitely don't overmix it. You know, just mix until everything is incorporated, because the more you mix it, the more gluten starts to develop in the flour. And for things like bread, that's what you want. You really want to work that dough and get some really good gluten developed in the flour, because that's what's going to give you good structure in your bread. But for things that you want kind of a delicate crumb, like cookies or cake, or like a quick bread like banana bread, you don't want to overwork your batter. You really just want to get it until it's just incorporated. Almost there. Whew. It's a little bit of a workout. Okay, all right. So I've got the flour and the oats all incorporated. This is what it looks like. And now I'm gonna add my mix-ins. So I'm using some chocolate chips, just semi-sweet chocolate chips right here. I have about a cup of those. And then I have a cup of some chopped hazelnuts. I currently live in Portland, Oregon, and Oregon is really well known for their hazelnuts. So they're everywhere. I love incorporating them into bakes. So I'm gonna just dump them right in. This is kind of where you can bring out your personality. A friend of mine said that she had some trail mix that was just sitting around, and she was gonna add that into her cookies. M&Ms, different types of chocolate chip. I think Dominic said he added some peanut butter, which is a great idea. Dried fruit, cherries, cranberries, freeze-dried fruit might be interesting too, if you just kind of, you know, give it like a little chop. This recipe is so versatile that you can play with it, and really just add whatever you want. Show your personality, or use what's around the house. Like I usually keep a bunch of nuts in the freezer. This is a great way to kind of take a look in there, see what you have, start to clean out some space. I know I have really, during this stay at home, been really trying to use what I have and look around my pantry and look in my freezer and bake using what I have, and just trying to avoid going out. And I've come up with some pretty fun stuff. So it's a bit of a challenge. It's kind of, see what you can, look at your ingredients, type them into Google and see what comes up and bake something new. So just getting all of those incorporated. Okay. All right. So that's it. They're all mixed in. If you're using a stand mixer, if you're using a hand mixer, like one of the little buzzy ones, definitely do this last bit by hand. If you're using a stand mixer, I just put it on the lowest setting to add my mix-ins, but you can also do it by hand if you want a little more control over it. So this is what it looks like. Everything's mixed in, and I'm going to cover this with some plastic wrap and stick it in the fridge for about 10-15 minutes, just to let kind of get a little chill on it, give the dough a little time to rest and settle down, and then we'll scoop it out and bake it. So I'm going to turn on my oven, 375. I have a cookie sheet right here lined with some parchment paper. Parchment is also another great baking tool. It leads, like, everything is easy to clean up. You just pick it up, throw it away. Nothing sticks. Whenever I'm baking a pie, I always put parchment on a baking tray underneath of it, and it just makes cleanup so easy. You're not sitting there like scrubbing a pan or trying to like chip your cookies off of the baking pan. Everything just slides right off. Oh, I should set a timer. Okay. So now we're just gonna hold off and give our dough a minute to chill, and then we'll scoop out some cookies. Let's say about 10 minutes. We'll say 10 minutes so we can scoop them out together. And does anyone have any questions about the baking show or just general baking questions? We have a few minutes to chat.
All right. Well, we do have a couple of questions coming through our Q&A here. So the first one is from Tracy Starren. And also, just before we get into that, I just want to let people know, if you would like to come on microphone and actually speak directly to Marissa, all you have to do is use the raise hand functionality. If you'd like me to read it out for you, I'm happy to do so. Use the Q&A function there, and we'll happily do that. Let's actually first let's kick it over to Dominic. Dominic's got a question for us. Dominic, come on, Mike.
I do. I'm not going to come on camera, but I have a question about alternative sugars, right? So I have to, in my household, I have to bake with low or no sugar, and it's definitely thrown a wrench in the things that I like to bake and some of the outcomes of those things, because I just find that the Truvia stuff and the Splenda stuff for baking just doesn't do the same internal caramelization and things that sugar does. Do you have any experience working with alternative sugars, and which ones do you find work the best? While we're getting the worker back, I made 2 batches of these cookies today, and I want to show you the difference between the 2. So I made one batch incorrectly. I looked at Marissa's directions and I found like, what is the most possible things I could put in them. And I made a batch with a lot of dry ingredients, and I formed them and I baked them off using a scoop, and they turned out like this. Now these look like more like scones. Oh, there she's back. Look more like scones. And then I did what Marissa suggested and added an extra egg yolk and more moisture, and they spread out and made these lovely, nice Levian bakery looking cookies. And as you can see, the difference between this hockey puck and this moist, delicious cookie is very palpable. And so we'll just wait for a second for her to reboot. The live theater, the show must go on, or the Zoom must go on, or however that looks like. But yeah, to kind of sum up, I used a lot of dry ingredients. In my cookies, I used coconut, chocolate chips, walnuts, almonds, potato chips, dehydrated strawberries, and the 2 X Factor ingredients, potato chips and Cheez-It crackers that I finely pulsed. Not finely pulsed, but like, rough pulsed, so they were a little bit jagged, and mixed them in. And the mix-ins really sucked the moisture out of the cookie dough, and it made it feel like almost crumbly in your hand. It almost felt like dry granola. So I just wanted to see what would happen if I baked those off. And as you saw, they almost held the exact shape I did when I baked them. I used a measuring cup to do 1/4 cup cookies to make them kind of largish. And what ended up happening was they held their shape. There wasn't enough moisture. So I went back to the second part of the dough, added an egg yolk, added some canned coconut milk to the mixture just to make it real moist. And that second batch was really tacky. It was like really super sticky. It was very, very wet when I formed it, and it baked off and made this delicious, crispy on the outside, ooey gooey center kind of cookie. And it looks like she is back. So hopefully we can get her back on the screen.
Well, we've got that. There are a couple of questions in the Q&A here that I actually am able to answer because I've got the instructions here. Marilyn Williams asked, what was the temperature for the oven? The temperature was to preheat to 375. And Sam Fisher asks, if my oven is pure convection, should I adjust the temperature? And a general rule of thumb on convection versus conventional oven is that you take it about 25 degrees Fahrenheit lower than the conventional oven temperature that's listed. So in this case, Sam, that would be about 350 degrees. However, each oven is a little bit different. They all have their own characters. So it may require a little bit of trial and error. Marissa, it looks like we've got you back. Can you hear me? And can we hear you?
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good.
All right, I'm gonna get off the screen again.
Okay.
Sugars, but it doesn't matter. So whatever you need, go for it.
Well, that was totally correct about the convection oven. Usually the rule of thumb is to lower about 20 degrees. I'm jealous that Sam Fisher has a convection oven because for certain things, they really do bake up nice, like give you nice even cakes, pastries, but you know, your everyday kitchen oven works too. So really quick, maybe finally I can answer just Dominic's alternative sugar question. I haven't baked a lot with alternative sugars. It's something I kind of would like to experiment with this summer. But I do have some friends that have. Bianca from the baking show, she's been doing a lot of stuff with alternative sugars. My rule of thumb is to go with what's natural. Skip the Splenda fake sugar alternatives and go for stuff like honey, maple syrup, coconut sugar is another one that I know people have used. Especially, you know, honey and maple syrup are pretty strong flavors, so you really don't have to use a lot to kind of get bang for your buck. But that's my rule of thumb, is to go for recipes that are using like a natural sugar over the fake stuff. I think you're going to get a better quality bake and just stuff that tastes better and not chemically.
All right, we got some more questions from the Q&A here. So Tracy Starren asks, can this be spread in a pan and baked as a bar?
I have not thought of that, but I don't see why not. I think these would make a great bar. I am not sure about the cooking time. That might just be something that you'd have to watch and kind of test out. But you know, I would say it would probably take a little bit longer to bake. These bake about 11, 12 minutes. So maybe for a bar, it might be closer to 20. But I would say, you know, set your timer for 12 minutes, see what they look like. You'd want to look for kind of a little browning around the edges and just make sure the center of your cookie tray is set. But that sounds like a great idea and, you know, super easy. Just spread it out and bake the whole thing. I love that idea.
Great. And so we've also got a question here from Kala. Kala is asking, is it okay if you put the chocolate chips and trail mix or just your general mix-ins in before you combine the dry with the wet ingredients?
I think that's fine. If you did that, I don't think that's a problem. Like I said, these are a pretty forgiving cookie. I think that it's okay for the steps to get a little mixed up. If you're baking something like a cake that is a little more temperamental, I would say you definitely want to do your mix-ins last. But these cookies are pretty flexible, so you can get away with a little bit more. And actually, I'm gonna turn my timer off, and I'm gonna grab my cookies from my dough from the fridge and start scooping. So if you have an ice cream scoop, that's a great way to scoop out your cookies. You just scoop them, plop them right on the tray, and then just throw them in the oven and bake. I don't have one with me, so I'm just using a big spoon. I'm gonna kind of you can honestly also make these as big as you want. The first time I made these, my husband said he really wanted like a Levain size cookie, which, you know, New Yorkers know are like, this big and like this thick. So they were delicious. So you can really make them as big as you want. So I'm just, I got like a good size scoop. I'm gonna make a little ball and just plop it right on my tray. These don't spread out a ton, so you can get them decently close together. And it's not, they don't have to be perfect. If your dough is really cold, I would recommend after you make the ball, just to give it a little smush on top. So they're not going to spread a lot, but you want to give them a little help if your dough is really cold. This makes a lot of dough, and usually when I make cookies, what I like to do is make, portion all the cookies out, make the little balls, and then stick the tray in the freezer. And so they just freeze up like this. And then whenever you got a craving for a cookie, you can just throw a couple of the frozen balls of dough into the oven, and you got cookies. You don't have to defrost them. If you are going to freeze them, I would definitely say, like, if I have my ball, I'm not going to flatten them out because my dough is not super cold. But if you are going to freeze them, definitely give them a little squish so they're more like this shape and not a perfect ball, since they're going to be frozen when you bake them. That will help them spread out a little bit more. But I prefer to do that versus baking the cookie and then freezing it. But you can also do that. Like when I bake cookies for the holidays, I bake probably 800 or 900 cookies, and I start usually right after Thanksgiving. So I bake up the cookies, let them cool, and then freeze them in Tupperware containers just lined with parchment paper between each layer of cookie, and they defrost really great, and you'd never know that they were frozen. You can also individually wrap the cookies in plastic, each cookie in plastic wrap, and freeze them if you want to just freeze them like in a baggie, but I don't do that. So I'll show you in a second. Let me just rinse my hands. So I have my first tray of cookies portioned out on my parchment paper. I'm gonna plop them in the oven. And they're gonna bake for 11 minutes, 11, 12 minutes. It kind of depends. Again, every oven's a little bit different. I like my cookies a little gooey in the center. So if that's your jam, definitely 11 minutes is probably about what you want. If you like them a little crispier, then I would go 12, 13 minutes. But definitely keep an eye on them. You want them nice. These are from yesterday. Brown on the bottom, a little brown around the edges, and you got a good cookie. Do we have any other questions, baking show questions?
Well, I'll come on camera and just ask, or on mic rather, and Jay, if you are gathering questions, feel free to ask them. Just talk a little bit about your experience on the show. Like, what was the casting like? What was the kind of like the soundbite form of the process, and what were some of the things that you learned from that experience that we don't get watching the show and trying to bake, pistachio financiers at home?
They were hazelnut, Dominic. Come on.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, it was it was really a dream come true. I've been a fan of the British baking show for so long, and this was actually my 3rd year applying. And a lot of on the show, they had applied multiple years. So I had gotten pretty close for season 4, but didn't quite make it. So I was just really over the moon. I mean, it's a pretty long process. There's a long online application, phone interviews, Skype interview, an in-person tasting where you bring them several things that you've baked for them to taste. And then the last bit is with a group of other people, other applicants, they film you baking, and kind of in the same format as like a technical challenge. They give you a very vague recipe, and they have cameras around. They're asking you questions, kind of seeing how you react. I was really lucky. Bianca, who is from Seattle, which is just a couple hours north of me, was in my group, and we were right across the table from each other and just immediately clicked. And I think that we both helped each other get on the show. We had really good banter, and we're having a lot of fun with each other. And this was also her 3rd time applying. So yeah, and then got the phone call that I was cast. And then for the next month, they have what they call boot camp, where each week they're sending you 2 weeks worth of challenges, kind of give you the parameters of the challenge. Like, it's cake week, you have to make a chocolate cake with these, a different icing inside than the outside. And so we have a week to come up with 4 recipes, because it's 2 weeks worth of challenges. We don't know the technicals, it's just the signature and the showstopper. Then we have to submit our recipes. The same day we get the next batch of recipes, and we have to edit the old ones. I feel very lucky that I'm a teacher, and so I had the summer off to really focus on it. It's a lot of work. I mean, I was baking, nonstop for a month, getting my recipes together. And then we filmed in the tent. We were in the UK for about 5 weeks. The British version films a little bit differently. Because the UK is a much smaller area, so they film on the weekends and people travel home during the week. But since we're coming from the United States and all over the place, we kind of just filmed pretty much nonstop for a month. So we'd have 2 days of filming, 2 days off, 2 days of filming. We had small little kitchens in our hotel so we could practice. I'm still kind of shocked that I made it to the finals. It was, when you get there, kind of going in, I was like, I'm going to win. And then once you're in the tent, you're like, oh my God, I just want to survive to the next week. It's so much harder. The ingredients are different. The dairy's different. Spices taste different because stuff is coming from different places. And there's just a lot of factors that, none of us were quite prepared for. And then there's cameras everywhere, and they're asking you questions. And then Tall Hollywood is staring you down with those steely blue eyes. And, there's just so much going on. But it was just an incredible experience. The people who were in my baking cast were, just an amazing group of people. We still talk almost daily. We have a very active text group where just check in on each other, share things that we baked, share recipes. So, not only did I kind of come away with the experience, but I came away with just a family of bakers that, I just know I'll be friends with for the rest of my life. So I'm really keeping my fingers crossed for the people that applied for the upcoming season. And I know that they were going to start filming a little bit earlier this year, and I'm sure that's been postponed. So I'm just keeping my fingers crossed that they will get a chance to do that. Maybe if it's later in the year. But yeah, it was amazing. So if you love baking, and you know, I definitely encourage people to apply and try, and it was just really, really special. You know, walking into that tent for the first time was just unbelievable.
So, which spice was your favorite to work with? Was it Spice Adams or Baby?
Oh, I mean, they were both so amazing. Spice Adams is just like the kindest big teddy bear. You know, whenever you were kind of in a really low moment, he just came over and gave you just a big bear hug. We've had a couple little Zoom chats, and he's popped in and said hi. But you know, I'm a you know, I went to high school in the late 90s, and to meet Baby Spice was just like, I had a big fangirl moment. But, you know, once you kind of get over that, like, again, she was also, Emma's just like the sweetest person in the whole world. Like, I think we just had the greatest hosts. They were so fun to work with, you know, always there with the kind word. But you know, I think my heart of hearts, you know, I had like the fangirl moment with Emma, but you know, Spice is like my bro.
I got another question from Kala here. Kala, I guess, Kala, if you're baking along with us, we'd love to see what you're doing. I'm happy to invite you up on stage, and if you want to turn on your camera, just shoot us a message in the chat there. But Kala's question is that Kala used gummies and wants to know what the difference would have been if used something else.
So she used like gummy bears in the cookies?
Yep.
Oh, I'm really interested to see how those turn out. Yeah, like, you know, I think I'm guessing that they're going to kind of get kind of melty in the oven. And I'm assuming the gummies must have some sort of something in them that kind of keeps them soft. So I can't imagine that they would get hard like once it cooled. And I feel like you'd kind of get that like gooiness. Yeah, I'm really interested to see how they turn out. That's like very creative. I never thought about that. I usually stick with chocolate, but I like the idea of adding in some like fruity candies too.
That's a perfect segue for us to just remind everybody that if you are baking along with us, or if you're going to give this recipe a shot a little bit later on, make sure you take some pictures of them and post them on social media using the hashtag QTMakes. And we'll be posting those and sharing those on our Facebook page and Twitter page as well. But we'd love to follow up, and we'd love to see what you guys manage to create and what you get going.
Yeah, if you're on Instagram, I would love if you tagged me in your cookies so I could see them too.
You have the best Instagram handle I have ever heard. I love it.
Yeah, my Instagram is Resting Bake Face. So, and actually I have a Facebook page too that's Resting Bake Face. So yeah, I would love if you would tag me in your stuff because I'd love to see it too. But yeah, you know, Resting Bake Face, it's that face that you have when like you're really concentrated on baking. Like, I mean, I don't know. I feel like I have a million bake faces.
That's so awesome. And one more time, I know you have cookies in the oven. Can you show us what your cookies look like again? And when you like give us like the cross section and everything?
Yeah, well, so this is one from yesterday. These have chocolate chips and pecans in them. And actually my cookies are about 30 seconds away from being done. So they're about, you know, they got like they're, you know, pretty hearty. And then here's a little view of the inside. So they're, you know, they stay pretty chewy. After they're cooled, I mean, these were my example cookies. We ate a bunch of them last night, but then I forgot to wrap the rest of them up, so they might have gotten a little dried out. But oh, here's my other cookie. So here's my cookies. So I like to, you can leave them on the tray for a couple minutes to, I'm gonna give you a little bird's eye view. Leave them on the tray for a couple minutes to cool, and then transfer them to a wire rack to finish cooling, or at least cool enough that you can eat it without burning your tongue. But yeah, I baked mine for 11 minutes because like I said, I like them a little gooier in the middle. But yeah, once they're done, once they're completely cool to room temperature, just store them in like an airtight container or a Ziploc bag so they stay nice and fresh. These might have gotten a little bit stale, but I'll probably still eat them. Just, dip them in some milk or like a cup of coffee. But yeah, they still, they are pretty tasty. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what people chose as their mix-ins. I'm excited.
One more question I have is the very Instagrammable trend of injecting cookies that I've seen in the last few months, where they take like either a pastry bag or a syringe and they put like marshmallow or peanut butter or something. They push it into the cookie and expand it. I've tried that before, but I've never found that to be particularly delicious.
Well, what I would say, if you're gonna do, and I can maybe do an example. So if I was gonna do like a filled cookie, what I would do is I would take some cookie dough. It might be better. This would probably be easier if this was colder, if you're gonna do a little filling. Flatten it out and then add a little scoop. So if I'm going to do some peanut butter, add a little scoop of peanut butter into the middle. Or if you're going to do like marshmallow, you could just stick a couple marshmallows in there. So I did some peanut butter right there. And then I would take another scoop, flatten that out, and then just seal it on top of the peanut butter.
Cool.
So then you have a peanut butter filled cookie, and then just bake this as you were going to bake your cookie before. Stick marshmallows in there. If you wanted to, instead of like adding chocolate chips to the whole batter, you could maybe just do like some chocolate chips or like a little chunk of chocolate like in the middle and make a little cookie sandwich like that. And then you kind of get that like ooey gooey melty chocolate center. But yeah, I think it was like Alton Brown, like years ago, he said that he doesn't like to have stuff in his kitchen that doesn't have multiple uses. I know I live in a small apartment in Portland. A lot of you are in New York City. We're living in small apartments. So kind of buying equipment that doesn't have multiple uses just takes up precious space. So, you don't need a little injection thing. Just smush your cookies together and fill it up, and there you go.
I love it. That's a very good answer. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I don't know if there are any other questions in the chat that are coming in. If those of you have questions, please feel free to either write them in the chat or raise your hand and we'll call on you. But just taking us into the home stretch, I guess just generally speaking, just baking wisdom. What are the things that are like some best practices or just some really good things to keep in mind in general while baking, especially when everyone's sheltering in place? There might be some food insecurity or people might not have access to everything that they use to make it perfectly. But generally speaking, like what are some good things to keep in mind when you're setting out to experiment a little bit?
I think, nowadays the internet is such an amazing tool. You can type in, say that you only have corn flour and you want to make a cake. So cakes with corn flour, and I remember a couple weeks ago, I wanted to make cornbread, but I didn't have cornmeal. All I had was maize. So I typed in cornbread recipe with maize and looked through and found one, and it was delicious. So I think, use the internet. King Arthur flour is a very, trustworthy, reliable recipe source. What else do I use? I use Cooks Illustrated a lot. You have to have a membership for some of their stuff, but there is some stuff that, especially that links to their Instagram page, that is available for free. I love stuff from the New York Times. Their stuff is really well researched. And use what you have. And I know that it's hard when you're baking and something doesn't turn out. So I would just say, just be sure to follow the recipe. Baking can be kind of scientific. I'm not a scientist. I'm a drama teacher. I'm very artistically minded, but the times when I've had a bad bake, it's when I haven't been focused and I look back at the recipe and I'm like, oh crap, I forgot to add this. So, I know right now everyone's being really careful to not waste ingredients. So definitely take your time when you're baking, read the recipe before you start. It's really helpful to get your area set up, get all your ingredients out, ready to go. So then you don't forget anything, you're not wasting any food, and use the internet. Google, find, this is not a promotion for Google, I'm so sorry. You can use whatever platform you would like, but if you have stuff that you're trying to use, just type it in, see what you can find, and just go for it.
And speaking of using unconventional ingredients, Kala is coming up on stage here with us, and she's going to show us her cookies with the gummy bears. Kala, if you would please go ahead and start your video.
Sorry. These are my cookies.
They look so great. Oh my gosh. They look amazing. And I love the little pops of the fun colors. Mm-hmm. Did you put anything else in there besides gummy bears?
M&Ms actually.
Oh my gosh. It's like a candy store and a cookie. Those look amazing. And I can't wait to hear how they taste it, but they look perfect. They look perfect.
Thank you very much,
so much
Kala.
for sharing.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
See what they look like when you break them open and see the inside part. I love that part of it.
Yeah. So mine are cool enough to handle. So, because these weren't super cold, so they did spread out a little bit more than the ones I baked last night, which were a little colder, but I don't mind, that's fine. So, they're very gooey. So here's the center. Yeah, and I'm happy with how these guys turned out. Now I have to find someone to eat all these cookies. They make a lot of cookies.
That's awesome. And thank you for your wisdom. I think, just the simple stuff of Google, read, prepare, use your best judgment. Just the very simple common sense stuff sometimes is what people who are experimenting with baking for the first time don't do. They nervously do it in real time as they're doing it, or they don't time to just look at their space a little bit. And that's why you see all those pictures of bread that look flat and everything else during our shelter in place time. So your wisdom is really well taken. Just to kind of consider what you're doing and your intentionality before you do it says a lot. I think we're out of time. So if there's not, Jay, if you don't have any more questions, I think we can kind of wrap it up. Those cookies are amazing. Your baking wisdom is expert. So we're so thrilled to have you.
Thank you.
For those of you who have tuned in on stage, thank you for being here. Please, again, show pictures of your food, #QTMakes. For those of you who were on Facebook, and there are a lot of you, and some of your parents, friends, and things like that shouting you out on the Facebook feed. Thank you for joining us on Facebook or on Zoom Live. And we'll be taking a little break from QT Makes for the next few weeks while we institute some other programming. And then down the road, we'll come back again. So maybe we'll have you back and do something else.
I'd love it.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. And, feel free to, if you have baking questions or you're looking for recipe suggestion, feel free to, DM me on Instagram, and I'm happy to chat and help.
And remind everybody of what that handle is again.
Yes, my Instagram is Resting Bake Face.
And we are at Queens Theater on Instagram and Twitter. Marissa, thank you so very much for joining us. This was fantastic. Thank you very, very much for joining us. Everybody have a fantastic day. Marissa, thank you. Enjoy those cookies.
Thank you.